Okay, one thing I've noticed from interacting with a lot of different storytellers is that we all kind of have our own headcanon for writing terms. It's like this is the general consensus for what this thing means, and most of us will agree with that. Like 90% of the way. Then there's this remaining 10 that's like, yeah, no. And it changes with each term. Like for instance, there could be a higher level of discrepancy in what people consider speculative fiction than say a plot structure. You get what I mean? But there can also be multiple terms to describe the same core concept, like the topic of this video. Magic system, tech system, power system is a pretty popular one in the anime community. But again, general consensus. If you're familiar with the concept, you kind of already know what I'm talking about, which is the mechanisms for whatever impossible thing you've got going on in your story. I use magic systems as like a catch-all term, and I'll usually get a couple of comments along the lines of, it's technology, they're not using magic, god damn. And I'll stop you right there and let you in on a little secret. I am going to keep calling it a magic system, and you can't stop me. But I am making a clear distinction this one time because that's kind of the entire point of this video. Tech systems, one of the lesser used terms that I see, and I want to say it's the sci-fi equivalent of magic. The way a magic system outlines its rules, limitations, and mechanics for how exactly it works, so too does a tech system define how the technology functions. But surely the difference isn't just a superficial genre change. There has to be more to it than swapping a flight rune for a jetpack and calling it a day, right? Well, we're finding out. But to discover, we must first ask questions. For starters, is it actually a tech system or is it just technology? The difference, you ask? Well, this goes back to something I discovered about its counterpart, magic, several years ago now, where there is a difference in how actionable it is. Think about it like a portrait painting. You have your character in the foreground of the story and then the background setting doing its own thing. As magic shifts into that foreground, the more actionable it is in the hands of the character, the more actionable it is towards affecting the plot of the story. And by extension, the more chances we get to break the stakes of the story. So the more we start to apply rules to it, or imply that there are rules in the case of softer magic, there is now a network of understanding, a system if you will. So when we move from that background into something more actionable, it doesn't feel like we could just summon whatever to save our characters from complete annihilation. Except we totally can. Don't tell the readers. That's the hard part, making it look like we don't do that. Side note, it's also the reason that when the magic isn't actionable or that understanding isn't quite there, if the magic is still used despite that, it tends to affect the plot negatively, so we still keep the same level of stakes, if not make them way higher. I actually have a video dedicated to this entire concept. If you want to check it out, please do, really. I think it's a great video. All that to say though, the same thing applies to tech systems. Technology is not the same as a technological system, at least the way I conceptualize it for stories. The same way having magic in your story doesn't immediately mean you have a magic system. Like Spirited Away, for example. At no instance in the story can we point to something and say, hey, yeah, that's a magic system. Some may argue that it's a soft system, and I might consider points depending on my mood that day. But the way I like to look at it is that soft systems are just less defined hard systems, not quite the amorphous, extremely vague thing that exists in Spirited Away. Well, congratulations, you actually have a tech system and not just tech. But all we've done so far is confirm the similarities between the two kinds of system, tech and magic. So then another question. Where actually is the divergence? There is more nuance to it obviously, but from what we've gathered so far, it seems like the two major determinants for whether we have a tech system or not is one, is it actionable? And two, do we have that network of understanding? Except by the implicit nature of technology, everything is already a system. That network of understanding is supposed to already be there. It's like that endlessly quoted Arthur C. Clarke essay. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Interesting read, by the way, I'll have it down below. But it means the inverse is also kind of true. For it to be considered technology, it has to be dumbed down, for lack of a better term. There has to be some level of understanding, at least enough to apply it practically, even though we don't have complete knowledge. But it means one determinant of the two is always checked by default in tech. Regardless of whether it's super actionable in the plot or it's more of a background setting, that network of understanding is there, or supposed to be there. So we bring it back to the context of a story, the narrative element. That is going to change how things work. The fact that technology demands latent understanding doesn't mean magic demands a lack of it, but it does mean tech systems implicitly demand more logic. That really is the crux of it. But let's do away with the fancy elaborate statement that's just me sniffing my own farts and get to the depths of of what it actually means. And so we go back to our flight room jetpack comparison. In this scenario, both grant you the power of flight, right? But only one demands that implicit logic. And when I say that phrase, I'm talking about the way readers interact with stories, or more specifically, the way they interact with speculative genres. Let's say we're reading a book and we get to the part where the impossible thing is being explained to you. You're getting the deets for whatever system the story's got going on. You read, hey, people don't ever have to touch the ground again because they now possess the flight room. Now, if you're a naturally curious reader, of course you're going to wonder, well, how the hell does that actually work? But usually, under the label of fantasy, that's just how things work here, is as much implicit logic as it really needs to have. It doesn't mean you can't question further or get specific rules or that there's not more to be discovered, especially depending on the narrative in question, but it's the basis of the world building. If it sets the precedent that things work differently from the real world, jobs and nations that don't exist, civilizations built on clouds, aspects of reality so changed that you could only really describe them as magic. Following that internal consistency, the flight room just becomes another intrinsic part of the world until such a situation arises where you actually do need a deeper understanding until you require explicit logic. But now we shift to the other side of things. We enter the realm of science fiction. There are many definitions of this ever-evolving genre, and even with those same fantastical pieces, a different history, civilization built on clouds, again, it's the basis of the world building that matters. Are there new rules to govern this world, or are we implying that the rules are extrapolated from the real world? The less rules are ported over from reality, the more fantastical the fiction. Genres can blend, obviously, but for sci-fi, we usually don't invent rules of science, physics, chemistry. Now, why it's still classified as speculative fiction is that we tack on rules. We build on things that already exist. We don't change the fundamental laws of the universe, or at least we try not to. So it also stands to reason that the more rules we add, the more fantastical the fiction. Humans aren't born with magical gifts. No, this is the result of a genetic mutation. Spacecrafts already exist. Now they just go faster than light. People have bionic prostheses. They're just way more advanced. We already combust fuel for flight. It just fits in a tinier package now. So even if those rules aren't explicitly detailed, which could be the case for a software text system or a system where the author just technobabbles, they are still alluded to being followed. And that's the key difference. We understand some of those rules even if you're not real-world scientists. We know you need thrust for flight. However, when it comes to fantasy magic, craziness is going on. And a lot of the times we build our framework from the ground up. We don't need thrust for flight, silly. No, we change how gravity works. What are you on about? Which is why you can have some stories that fantasy is so hard it becomes its own science. Magical technology, if you will. Lines really get blurred there, and I find it so fascinating. I won't get deeper into it yet, but Stormlight Archive is a quintessential example of this. Sanderson takes great care not to club you over the head with it, but sometimes it really does feel like you need a Rosharan PhD of magics to understand what the hell is actually going on. Because there's so many small pieces that already defy our laws of reality that then join up to make a huge defiant piece. I think it's why I see magic technology on that level almost exclusively in long-running fantasy series. If not, we would have magic textbooks, not stories. It takes a deft hand is all I'm saying. But to make a really reductive and generalized statement, because magic is usually easier to accept than because technology. Another way to put it is that tech systems are more susceptible to the thousand whys because we usually understand the rules it's supposedly playing by, so we can ask those questions. But it will ultimately come down to how the reader interacts with the story, the level of suspension of disbelief, and how the system in question is being portrayed. Basically, it's subjective. But there's another difference this brings about. So we've established that tech systems tend to add more fantastical elements and rules to what is already existing, as opposed to just creating rules like a lot of magic systems do. We're pushing technology to its limits or adding parts that lets us change it in a fundamental way, like integrating alien tech or something along those lines. But tech is created towards utility. Even if it's not quite actionable in the plot, it is still created for a purpose. What that leads to is decentralization. It is the shifting of that system from a few to the many. Now, there are a plethora of magic systems that grant everyone a path towards wielding that power. I mean, things like arcane schools are a massive trope in fantasy fiction. You go there, you learn the thing. Maybe some people have more of an aptitude, but anyone can do it. And on the other hand, there are definitely tech systems where only a select few are capable. Only a special brain can control the VR mindscape. Only people with the X factor can avoid cancelling the life subscription in the mech suit. But by and large, tech systems tend to lean towards the anyone can do it side. Again, this could just be me talking from my my own personal consumption of fiction, so if you have a different perspective, would love to hear it. But it does feel like that is the default and anything else is sort of a variation. Even in some of those tech systems with a select few, oftentimes it's more like extra perks are granted to them, but everyone can still do the base thing. But in tech systems where pretty much everyone has access, if it still calls the number of people that can use the technology, it can limit access in a number of different ways other than they just can't do it. For that in particular, we can look at Cyberpunk. Everyone can get cybernetic enhancements, and specifically simple enhancements, like, oh, I want better eyes or a stronger arm. At the base level, it's like having a smartphone in your pocket. It's even just a part of the fashion. Then it becomes a matter of your socio-economic class if you can get the real crazy enhancements.
You're going to have to fork over some credits too.
Why did I say that? If you still want it and you can't afford it, then you have to resort to some criminal activity. If you're in the military, you can get military grade stuff. It's not a matter of if you have it or don't. There is a little bit of that sprinkled in as well with your aptitude for Chrome. Some people have a high tolerance for it and they can stack cybernetic augments higher than most. However, most people don't have access to enough Chrome for that to even be a problem. In this system, since everyone has access, there is more of a focus on the sources, the distribution, the acquisition, as opposed to the alternative of innate access. That is the method of limitation and control. There are certain lines blocked off for regular people, and even when you're part of a group with special access, there are still lines that are blocked off for you. There are only a handful of people with free reign over the tech system, and it's usually the people with fuck you money. Insert really cool segue about themes here. Speaking of themes, that is another place we find a deviation. When it comes to that, however, it's less about magic versus tech and more pitting fantasy as a whole against sci-fi, but then relating it back to magic systems and how they serve the story. Themes in sci-fi tend to be humans and their relationship with technology. A lot of what ifs involved. What if you conquered our solar systems? What if you had advanced bionics? What if AI rose up against us? What if tech never fixes the world's problems? And those are cautionary tales most of the time, but don't necessarily have to be. And so, depending on what you want to do with a system, what you want to have it achieve in the narrative, you could create one that ends up serving those themes, which I highly suggest you do because it just adds so much more impact. Like with Cyberpunk I talked about, that soft tech system of everyone has access but not really is the epitome of capitalism. Adding a tech system like that to a show where people literally get ignored in a car wreck if they don't have the right insurance is just going to amplify that theme. Edgerunners piling on Chrome while being fully aware of the looming threat of cyberpsychosis serves to illuminate the peer pressure of gang culture, another prevalent theme in the story. When it comes to fantasy though, it tends to tackle more grander themes, like the classic good versus evil, destiny, tradition versus progress. And like sci-fi, those themes aren't exclusive to the genre, but they do appear more often. And by extension, if you as a writer want to amplify those themes, you can create a system that serves them. Like for instance, Lightbringer's Chromaturgy deals with themes surrounding power and morality. The magic users can draw on the different colors of the light spectrum for magical effects, but each color corresponds with different attributes and abilities. It reflects the emotional complexities of the character wielding it, a sort of mirror of their morality. Orange is associated with ambition and creativity, great for creating constructs, and physically it's really malleable and vibrant. Subred is sticky and flammable, almost liquid. Fantastic for fire, obviously, and explosives. The wielders are passionate and driven by their emotions. The users exert themselves on the world, holding significant influence on the political scene, but one rises above all. They hold the power of every color light in the spectrum and are responsible for maintaining the peace, the prism. And wouldn't you know it, they have the most moral dilemmas to deal with out of everyone. The magic system reflects the themes of power, control, and morality. But to be honest, those are pretty common themes in terms of magic systems for fantasy. Let's take a look at Frieren. In this world, whatever you can visualize, you can do with magic. Imagination is key. It is as much an art and expression of yourself as it is a tool. And the type of magic you put stock in to learn is an awesome gateway into your philosophy as a person, which is a great mirror to the theme surrounding the fleeting nature of existence. Just as you choose what you value in magic, so too do you choose in life. If you take nothing else from this video, please go watch Frieren. Behold, the list of little, almost inconsequential things to keep in mind while considering a tech system over a magic system. Really rolls off the tongue, huh? Also, there's nothing on here. Number 1, tech systems tend to have less homogeneity. What do I mean by that? Well, it's exactly how it sounds. When you think of how diverse a system can be, chances are you find the upper limit in a tech system. There can be such a difference in origin, level of sophistication, mechanisms, and application between different aspects of a singular system. It's actually so interesting to notice. I mean, this really isn't an exact science, but you know that Sanderson law, the one that says expand what you already have before adding something new? Yeah, I see tech systems break that law more often, which isn't exactly a bad thing. I really should talk about Sandoz laws. I've been teasing that video for like a year now. To make another reductive statement, writers tend to make tech systems a little less themed, for lack of a better word. It's the way you'll see the system in Mistborn revolving around metal, or the one in Hunter x Hunter revolving around men, and there's pretty much no deviation from that core. But in sci-fi, the range of technology is typically eclectic, and while it can still fit the broader themes of the story, the system on its own doesn't have one unifying concept. In Halo, for example, there are AI companions, advanced weaponry, slip space travel, and it all still fits the broader themes of military space warfare, but nothing that ties it all together on a smaller scale. The technologies serve varied purposes, each fitting different facets of the story rather than revolving around a cohesive system. Again, this is my perspective, my assertions based on fiction I consume, so let me know. Item number 2, tech systems are more modular, or at least it's easier to add new aspects to the tech system, especially because of that lack of homogeneity. Well, maybe not easier, just more common. I can't tell you exactly why this is, but here's my theory. Since magic systems by their nature tend to be an intrinsic part of the world, again, that quality of this is just how things work here, aside from the system itself, it usually ties into laws that govern the world as a whole, making changes to it feel more disruptive. It's something more innate to the setting, and once more, not that all this couldn't be true for a tech system, but it just slightly tends to be more so for magic. Like there's not as many components you can add before the world starts to feel inconsistent, or you start to bend established rules too far. Whereas the inherent nature of technology is advancement, breaking internal consistency is still something to be aware of, but there is a little bit more leeway here. Item number 3, tech systems are more standardized. This also comes about again because of the inherent nature of technology, where it has to be understood enough to be applied practically. And because of that understanding, it generally means the usage is standardized. Not necessarily that there are concrete rules, we already went over that. Not all tech systems are hard systems, but it's in the way the user interacts with the system. If you've watched my magic users video, it's more reminiscent of the top right side of the graph. You thought I was going to go this entire video without mentioning a graph of some sort? How naive. But the hard same section where the system tends to be treated more like a tool, because tech is a tool. So it tracks that usage tends to be more standardized. I recommend checking out that video, it's a great companion to this one. And if you want in on a super secret video that only a select few have access to, check out the Patreon. Our numbers grow steadily, will you too join the fold? But back to this video, you might have heard me say so and so isn't exclusive to a tech system, or this is more so for magic systems, or this tends to lean towards that side or this side. But that is because this whole thing is a closer look at the lines separating this stuff. And they are damn near non-existent. They can get really blurry. And oh, what a joy it is to blur the lines. Ooh, I get to talk about mage tech now. The unruly spawn of sci-fantasy. People are always going to tell the story they want, no matter the form it takes. Learning how to write, applying labels like magic system, plot structure, world building, all of it is just learning how best to facilitate that story. Genres don't exist. What we do there is what scientists do in study of the natural world. They learn to draw boxes around what's already there, the same way we draw boxes around storytelling patterns. Mage tech is just one of those concepts that is infinitely harder to contain in a box. Whatever impossible mechanism you've got going on, whatever system you end up with, if you can look at it and consider it mage tech, better believe there is a plethora of combinations you can use to get that result. And as much as I want to make a video talking about all those different combinations and what they can look like, sadly, my life is finite. So I'll just talk about what is easily my favorite way to achieve this. A tried and true method for me is genre constraints. I've talked about this before in one of my earliest videos. Taking the soul of one thing and blocking it into the body of another, using the tropes more conventional in one genre and applying them to another. How would a seer function if you interrupted your spiel about some prophecy to an unfortunate chosen one and plop them into a sci-fi world instead? Maybe it's not some magic gift to grant you sight of the future. In the sci-fi world, it could be the power to harness quantum probabilities or some other techno babble. I can feel the vitriol of scientists all over the world telling me how incorrect that probably was. It's always quantum something, isn't it? And that's a great side note actually. Research is relatively more important in tech systems. But the seer example would just be a superficial genre change. I asked that question earlier, is the difference just superficial? Turns out you make it as deep as you want to, depending on what the narrative requires. You choose which side it leans more towards using those minute differences we just spent a great deal of time going over. What would decentralization look like for the quantum seer? Maybe a helmet or some sort of techno tiara that grants you access. What about the themes? Maybe it takes on the stereotypical sci-fi themes surrounding humans and their relationship with technology. This could fry their brains, but they still do it. We could combine decentralization with the themes. Maybe commercialize this techno tiara. What does society look like when everyone knows their future? You see how you can get the ball rolling? But while this is fun, ultimately what I've learned is that any attempt at delineation might as well fall to the wayside. There really is no clear distinction. That being said, it is in fact not superficial. When you go a little deeper, there are qualities you can apply to your systems that help them lean either which way. And I do think they're worth keeping in mind, as they can help you get closer to exactly what you're looking for. Something else that can help you get closer to what you're trying to achieve is understanding the people who are going to be using whatever system you end up coming up with. It's that video I mentioned earlier, and it is right here. Until further notice. Okay, bye.